And we are live. All right. Welcome back to another great episode of Dr. J Radio Live. Of course, I'm your host, Dr. J, broadcasting from the City of Angels, City of Riots, City of Juju, bad juju. That's what I'll keep it as today. Now, I'm sure you've all been paying attention to the news. I can't say that I'm that shocked. I've kind of expected something like this to happen. All of you know about this soft disclosure. And speaking with lots of friends, and I'm talking about friends within the ufology community, in my eyes and some other people's eyes, back when the DOD released those 3 videos and said, it's not a weather balloon, it's something that outran our jets, we don't know what it is, etc., to me that was disclosure, right? But now we have something even more important. We have what the stories are saying, quote, off-world vehicle, singular or plural, not from this earth. That is huge, huge. And if you all have been paying attention to Third Phase of the Moon lately, they've been doing some awesome reporting about all this. I hope everyone does check that out later tonight. There'll be another premiere that I'll be a part of that. And this is a story that I think is it's never going to get old until Preston and I already spilled our beans of our guest today. You already seen the promotion. Preston and I have been saying for years, when are we going to be able to go to a museum and see the Roswell wreckage or the Aztec wreckage? So, with that being said, let me bring on my dear friend, the one and only Preston Dennett. Preston, welcome back.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to speak to you. You know so much. I mean, you have so much knowledge, and everyone knows the story of how I got started with reading UFOs over in California, so we don't need to touch that again. And if everyone wants to hear a really amazing interview with me and yourself, all everyone has to do is go look at the last one we did about crashes and retrievals. Now, things have changed since then because of these new statements. So we're going to do a part 2 of that, talking about more crash and retrievals. And at the same time, we're going to be taking some questions from you in the last 20 minutes or so. Again, this is only a power hour. If we have to go over a handful of minutes, we will do so to accommodate you. And so please curb the questions till near the last 20 minutes or so. So first, Preston, before we talk about some famous cases in New York and New Mexico, places where we didn't really have a chance to talk about them, what do you, in your eyes, what do you think is going to happen now that we're hearing this all over the place? New York Times, Fox News, you name it. Off-world vehicles not made from this earth.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible, isn't it? I don't know what's going to happen. This took me a bit by surprise. I think it took everyone by surprise. It's a bigger step than I thought that they were going to take. So we'll see when they release this information. It's kind of a tease at this point. So I don't know. I'm hoping that it goes all out and they show, more than just pictures or a fragment
Welcome
of
back
metal.
to Researchers on a Mission Radio. I'm your host, Dr. J, and of course, my co-host, all the way from London, Johnny Webb.
Right.
Of course, we
Right.
have
I don't
another
think that's
incredible
gonna
show for you
happen,
today.
But I don't know.
Bringing you
There seems
one
to
of
be a lot
my
of
favorite
pressure
ufologists,
coming
somebody
from
who has taught me
somewhere
literally
to
for
get
the
this
last
information
25
out.
years on this subject,
So we'll
whose
see.
integrity
It's really
is
in their
so
hands at
high
this point.
that he's able to
Now,
gain
if
access
everyone
to so many
recalls,
witnesses that over the years,
Tom
everything
DeLonge,
he said has
formerly
pretty much been verified. And this is why I always look to this person for information.
He made the rounds
and
on CNN,
top of that,
Fox
not
News,
only
One American
he's
News,
written a
etc.,
new book,
etc.
he also received the British Ufologist Award for the Lifetime Achievement Award by UFO Truth magazine. Without further ado, let's bring on the one and only Timothy Good. Mr. Good, welcome to the show.
Good evening, sir.
It's always a pleasure to speak to you. Last time, of course, we ran out of time. I know it's going to happen again today. I can go on for weeks in a row, and we still run out of time. You're such an encyclopedia of information, and that's why I'm just delighted to have you, and the listeners are delighted to hear you again. I guess let's just jump into it. Your new book, Earth and Alien Enterprise. Just recently, we interviewed Paula Harris.
Now,
and Paula Harris,
on
another show,
she
said 2 books that she would recommend for all those people out there who are interested in ufology and want to learn. One of the books was Earth and Alien Enterprise, so she truly holds you in high regard. And I have to agree with her fully, because that book covers everything, going back to some of the first case of missing time, to one of the earliest landings that was documented, going back to the 30s, pre-World War II. Everything that goes against what debunkers are saying. Let's just start with the Rorschach case, 1932. Can you tell us how you came about that case and a little bit about it?
Well, I was told about
that's
it
what I'm afraid of.
by
I
a
hope
friend.
that's not what this is. And intuitively, I don't think it is. I think they're going to go a little farther.
So I made a special trip.
I think there's got to be some real pressure
Montana,
on them,
I believe it was,
disclose. And, it's very interesting to me that it's coming at this particular time with all the turmoil we're having in society.
Oh, yes.
And, I've asked around, and most people, the average Joe on the street, this has not affected them at all. They don't know about it.
No, not at all. And let me ask you this as well: did you know that the newest Gallup poll, and this is mind blowing because I never thought we'd actually be the majority. 68% of the global population now says that they believe in extraterrestrial life. That's not including the people who believe we've been visited, but that number is finally getting closer to 100. I mean, really, you got to be living under a rock to not be paying attention to even SETI, right? Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. I know Seth Shostak, I keep debating with him, hey, look, what do you think of these DoD videos? He will not comment. But even someone like him is finally acknowledging that there's so many Goldilocks planets. We can't hide from it anymore. And for us to think that we are the only intelligent life, and not just intelligent, for us to think that we're the masters, that we have more than anything else, is really arrogant.
Yeah, we're surrounded by stars. I mean, look, all you have to do is look out the sky at night. And for people who think like, oh, UFOs are demonic, I mean, no. We cannot be the only entities in the entire universe that are biological in the physical plane. It's just mind-blowing to even think that. Yes, UFOs are real, obviously. By UFOs, I mean extraterrestrials, and have been visiting us for thousands of years. It's ramped up since 1947, the modern age. But now we're at a tipping point. We've got that 100th monkey. Most people believe in this subject. Most people believe our government is covering it up. All the major governments have information. They're all disclosing at various rates, I guess. So I don't know who's going to be the first. But it looks like we're taking a big step here.
It really is, and I really hope that we finally see exactly what we've been saying. I showed you the Skinny Bob footage, which consists of 4 different things, and one of them being the supposed Roswell footage, but that's grainy, black and white, 70-some years old, almost 80, not 80, but 73 years old, if it is, in fact, from the Roswell, unless it's from another craft. But it doesn't show us what we really want to see. I want to be able to have access Bob Lazar style, climb into these sports models, see it in action up close. Better yet, I want to fly the damn thing.
I think that'll happen. Flying, I don't know, but I think there will eventually be a theme park perhaps set up where people can go up and walk through a UFO. They've got a lot of them. They've got hundreds of these things. Our government alone has hundreds of these objects. That says a lot. I mean, it's not just Bob Lazar or, Dan Burish or a few people. It's a lot of people saying this. Very high-level people.
Now, this is important because let's talk about the implications that if China has this technology or masters this technology. I've heard this argument before that whatever nation masters the ability to control gravity or to have a generator that creates gravity or anti-gravity, whatever, regardless, it's the same thing. The point is things like cloaking, force fields, faster than light travel all become not just a possibility, but are right there if that's what you happen. So do you think by the Pentagon, DOD divulging this information, showing us this craft, is going to possibly start a war?
No, it's my understanding that on the highest levels, various governments are cooperating with this subject. I don't know if that's true, but I suspect that it is. And that this subject is very tightly controlled. Everything that we see coming out on this is not an accident. Because people have been killed over this. This is a serious business. People may laugh about UFOs and, ridicule them, but at the highest levels of government, it's no joke. It's very, very tightly controlled.
It really is, and I'm glad you mentioned the fact that people have been killed over this, because a couple people have asked me, well, how could we keep something like this secret? Well, I'll give you 2 words: Manhattan Project. And if you knew, first of all, 130,000 people worked on the Manhattan Project. Only a handful knew what was really going on at the top level because it was so compartmentalized. Let's just assume that somebody found out what was going on and they left the base or they left the area. They would have been killed. And I'm glad you mentioned this because I look at James Forrestal, MJ1, the original MJ1, as possibly, in my eyes, the first fatality covering this up, or wanted to spill the beans and kill to silence this. What do you say about that?
Well, Roswell left a trail of dead bodies, apparently. I'm not sure if he's definitely among the earliest, I think. But yeah, we don't know how many people have lost their lives over the subject, but we know that many, many, many people have been threatened. Leonard Stringfield, who is really the guy who spearheaded the whole crash retrieval disclosure, was threatened many times prior to going to speak about various subjects. Many of his witnesses refused to talk to him, told him a little bit, and then said, sorry, I can't talk. So we don't know how many people have this knowledge and are not talking out of fear. I think it's time to talk. I don't think the government is going to prosecute anyone at this point, because to do that, to prosecute someone, is basically an admission of guilt, saying, oh yeah, we actually have been covering it up, and this person's telling the truth.
Yeah, you're essentially right. In order to prosecute, they would have to divulge that there are these programs. I hesitate to say the word program because there are programs, multiple, and you're right, they would have to divulge the secret in order to prosecute. And we also have the last of the old guard finally dying. If this exactly right. If this was, say, 1947 or 1952 or even during World War II, 41, if the government told you to shut up, people were super patriotic then. You did your job and you shut up. Now, with the distrust in the government, with shady stuff happening at the highest levels, look what happened in the 2016 election where you have one administration spying on the other. What about these endless wars that finally seem to be coming to an end? We, citizens, not just do not trust the United States, but also its allies and its adversaries. I can't tell you how many friends I have from China that are no longer citizens there, because if they were, they would be so hesitant to speak negatively about that country that they, for good reason, that they are so scared that when they finally become citizens here, they talk about how much they are scared there, the communism is killing them, things like that. So the distrust in people now, as opposed to 75 years ago, is so much higher. I think this would be a great way to possibly bring peace. I mean, do you think that's what it's going to bring us?
I hope so. I'm honestly skeptical of that. We are such a warlike race. and have been violent for so long, to have a sudden world peace would be amazing. That could be one of the motives behind this, but I don't think so, because our government and governments around the world have a track record of doing things that benefit them. So this disclosure must be helping them on some level. It's not about the people, I don't think.
Oh, it's never about the people. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
So the real question is, why are they doing it? How does this help them? And my guess is that there's a lot more behind the curtain. It's not just UFOs. There's a lot. And by putting this out, it's going to satisfy a lot of people for at least some time. But there's got to be more behind it, because why else would they do this?
Yeah. I mean, that's literally showing the royal flush in their hand. Why would you do that unless you have more aces up your sleeve or something like that? Now, this is an opinion question. In your opinion, what else do you think they'd be hiding that would be such a revelation if released, that admitting to extraterrestrials visiting us, advanced ETs that have technology that we have no idea how it operates, and then showing it to us? If they're going to go that far, what do you think is really hidden? And in my eyes, Preston, in my opinion, I think of Skinwalker Ranch. That's what I think. I think, okay, let them have this, technology and UFOs, because we don't want to let them know what's really happening in places like Skinwalker Ranch.
I mean, that's $1 million question, isn't it? I don't know. I think about, the space race, or rather, the hidden space force. Probably something along those lines. Perhaps a real shakeup in what we think of as human history is all wrong. Are we a product of extraterrestrial intervention? I think that that's a good possibility, that the human race did not originate on Earth. It's really hard to say. I'm very interested to see how the ETs themselves are going to play a part in all of this. Because, you know what I mean?
Well, especially since I've heard a lot of the secrecy comes from their side.
I'm thinking if this disclosure really moves forward, we're going to have a very different world in terms of open official contact. The UFOs may land for real, or this could be a whole false flag preparation. You know what I mean?
Oh, you know what? I'm so glad you brought that up, because I considered that, but then I thought, what for, unless it's a false flag as a guise for attack, or look what's happening now, to shelter in place again, lockdown again.
Right. What if the government says, yeah, UFOs are real, and here's the ship, and guess what? They're evil, and they're going to take over the world, and they're going to attack us. Stay at home. It could be that sort of thing. And then they could put up this huge event that might not be even true. This has been rumored for years. And so it's something I think we got to watch out for. We have to be very careful with what happens, over the next few months and years in terms of UFOs and mass sightings. And, because there seems to be a movement to sort of paint the extraterrestrials in a bad light. And I don't know if that's entirely true. If the ETs wanted to take over, they could have.
Oh, yes, easily.
Right? They do kidnap people. There's a lot of stuff that's going on that's not good. I mean, you can't. There's no way to rationalize UFO kidnappings as being something for someone's benefit. I just don't see how you can kidnap someone and say, this is okay.
Over the last 18 months, we have literally been invaded. There is so many more sightings and so much great footage than there were, say, in the 5 years combined prior to that. Now, we have a lot of things that are happening on this earth. We have political discourse. You have these massive, global changes as far as weather, earthquakes, tsunamis, hurricanes, etc., volcanoes. And I'm wondering if they're paying attention, not because of us talking about disclosure, but I wonder, I don't want to be the negative person here, but are they kind of watching the end of the world?
The ETs?
Yes.
Well, they've been warning us about it since the 1950s. Whether you're, believe in the contactees like George Adamski, Howard Menger, Daniel Fry, all those guys, Truman Bethlehem, they got messages about nuclear proliferation, upcoming disasters, social collapse. And then the Greys come along, and they give the same darn message. And so do the, Nordics or the human lookings. And for that matter, the praying mantis, all of them. Doesn't matter what type of alien you're dealing with. They have the same major message. Watch out, beware. There is turmoil coming. Whitley Strieber got messages like this. Betty Andreas, every major abductee, the files of researchers are filled with cases like these. And I think it would be a mistake to ignore them. So I think the ETs are very aware of the turmoil that's going on right now. I don't think it's going to be the end of the world. I think it's good news. I think it's the end of corruption. I think it's the end of lies.
I really hope so, because this country, the United States of America, because I know there are people in the chat that are not necessarily in the U.S., we are supposed to be a democracy, a republic, by the people, for the people. It doesn't seem to be that way anymore. And if we finally get to that stage where corruption is done, maybe we will have the utopia that Ronald Reagan said in his infamous speech. Actually, he had two speeches, one at a high school, the other at the UN General Assembly, where, in other words, I'm paraphrasing here, he said that wouldn't we all, if we were faced by an alien threat from another world, wouldn't we all come together as humans to face this threat? Do you think that is, by disclosing this to us, something like that will happen? Because, sure, Asian people look one way, black people look another way, Latin American look another, but we're all human beings. We all bleed red on the inside. We're all the same.
Yes, and for that matter, that goes for ETs as well, which I find very interesting, that there's a big movement to sort of overcome racism, which has been a real problem since early Earth history. This is all really, really interesting to see these things happening, and I think it's all connected for sure. All these movements are interconnected.
Now, we know that there have been at least 100, if not hundreds, if not four-digit number of crashes over, I want to say, millennia. And if you recall, if you ever had a chance to see it, I know a lot of people did hear it, the Joe Rogan, Bob Lazar interview, when Bob Lazar, I've never heard him disclose it until that interview, that he was told at least one of the 9 craft, that S4, was found in an archaeological dig. So if we have crashes with bodies, sometimes you have living survivors. And this is something I saw in chat a while ago, so I'm paraphrasing here. If they have the capability to come here, very easily, why would they leave behind such radical technology for us?
Yeah, people have speculated about this. Why wasn't the Roswell craft scooped up immediately? I'm not so sure these guys are as technologically advanced and on top of things at all times as some people might think. Or perhaps it was a gift. Perhaps it's a manipulation tactic that they know very well how we're going to react to this, and was a way of releasing technology to us. I don't know. It's very easy to speculate in this field. And I try not to do that, because you can go right down the rabbit hole and end up over the edge.
Oh, absolutely. You absolutely can go down the rabbit hole, especially when you speculate, and that's when you start crossing the border from science to science fiction, and then anything can be speculated at that point. Now, again, this is the last part I'll say with speculation. If I was to guess why they would leave this technology behind, maybe they were trying to tell us, hey, stop screwing around with the nuclear weapons and propulsion that we were testing in the 40s and 50s, and try this out for size. This is the way the rest of us use it, and I think it would be easier for us to reverse engineer something like that than for us to, or for them, or for the Earth, or for whoever it is waiting, for us to actually get to the point where our material sciences can figure it out on our own.
Yes, and yes, because when people are taken on board a UFO, the most common thing, of course, is being physically examined. Second is being given messages, usually about nuclear proliferation or upcoming disasters. But beyond that, it's being taken to the control room and flat out told how these things fly. Flat out. People are told, shown the engine, said, listen, this is how we do it. There's no fossil fuels. It's all electromagnetism. There's sources of free energy everywhere. A number of abductees, experiencers, come away with detailed plans and try to build this stuff. Whitley Strieber, as a little kid, tried to build a counter-rotating magnetic engine. He talks in his book Communion about a farmer who apparently successfully did build one in his barn, turned this thing on, and suddenly everything metal in his barn was drawn right towards this engine, including a car engine, which knocked him in the head and knocked him out and ended up burning down the whole barn. But my point is, the UFOs are doing a grassroots movement. They've given it to the government. The government has not been transparent, forthcoming, or truthful. So now they're going to the people in large numbers and taking them to the control room and saying, this is what you need to do. So yeah, the time has come for this technology to be released. And that may be one of the driving forces behind this disclosure, is because there's so many people who already have this information. And let's face it, the cover-up has been a complete failure.
Absolutely. Just like the war on drugs has been a failure.
Right? Everyone knows UFOs are real. More people believe that our government is covering this information on this subject up than actually believe in UFOs, according to the Gallup poll. So.
Yeah, and I'm so glad it's finally going in the direction it is, because, for all of us who believed in this, and especially for those people out there who have had contact, knock on wood, I haven't, I hope to have it one day, and I don't want to be plucked out of my room or car. I'd rather kind of be conscious when I meet these ETs. The point being is, just like you said, a lot of them are being shown different things aboard these craft, and I'm very curious as to how far we've come along in replicating this technology. Now, a lot of people talk about the TR-3B, which allegedly looks very similar to the Belgian triangle. I'm sure you recall that photo and that wave.
Yeah, that photo turned out to be a hoax, though.
Well, talk to us about that for a moment, because when you Google Belgian UFO wave, that's the first thing that still pops up. Did anyone take credit for that hoax, or how did you?
Yeah, the gentleman who took the photo said, I'm really sorry, but I faked it. That doesn't mean the Belgian wave was fake by any means. I've got a book on the subject. It was absolutely a very real wave, one of many waves, which is part of the ET agenda of disclosure. They, like the Phoenix Lights, like the Topanga Canyon wave, like Gulf Breeze, like Hudson Valley, like the Wytheville, Virginia wave. Most people don't even know about that one. That was a big one. There's these regular, gigantic UFO flaps that are clearly publicity stunts.
The irony too is, with waves and flaps, there's no pattern that I seem to recognize. It's not like, okay, there's a giant or a pollution spill or an oil spill, and then boom, they show up. Or there is a massive increase in population. Whatever wave happens, it seems to start and stop on its own volition with no rhyme or reason. Did you ever see if there's any reason why these waves happen?
I certainly looked for patterns. They do seem to turn up every 5 to 10 years. They're often over small towns, usually like a small town near a large city center, perhaps. That's not always true. They sort of bounce around the globe a little bit. It might be Mexico City one day, and then Belgium the next, and then back to the U.S., and then over to France. And so there seems to be some pattern to it, but it's very hard to pin down.
Now, last time we talked for 2 hours about lots of crashes and retrievals. We went through a lot of them in California because that's where we live, and of course that was my favorite book, UFOs over California. Still is, by the way, for anyone out there wants some good reading. Definitely read Preston Dennett's books. And then we went into some, we handpicked some other cases. I think you did the Central Park UFO case in New York, if I'm not mistaken. And then, of course, we covered Roswell, where basically it started, but not by time frame as far as blowing this up. And we covered some more in Colorado and, of course, New Mexico. With regards to New York, in the history that you studied, when did they have their first crash and retrieval?
As near as I can tell, there was an incident in 1952 in Central Park. This comes from just one or two witnesses. New York resident Barbara Hudson, who was interviewed by Timothy Green Beckley, said she was driving with her mother and brother down 110th Street around dusk when they noticed a very large group of people who gathered and pointing at the sky. So they pulled over and joined the crowd, and looking up, see this strange craft surrounded by a blue halo of light. It's kind of barrel-shaped and has a very large porthole. She said there must have been at least 100 people there. And this thing just glided at a very low altitude right over 8th Avenue, passed over the Wadley High School. There was a loud explosion, like guns being fired. Several storefront windows shattered, and a piece of this object fell into Central Park. And the military showed up pretty darn quick and cordoned off the area, but not quick enough where Barbara Hudson says she saw what looked like part of a UFO. She said it was dull metallic color, similar to aluminum. The other side of it was a pale lavender color. The metal itself was glowing, just like it was when it was in the sky. And she and many other witnesses tried to get closer, but the military police were escorting everyone away. So I don't know. It's an interesting case. She lived right there. She went into her apartment, looked out the window. She saw large floodlights being set up. She saw other scraps of debris being quickly retrieved. One had fallen on the street itself. Military personnel carted that away and then started retarring the street where it had made a hole, which is something we've seen before, by the way.
Cover up, of course.
They'll actually repave a street or plow over a field. Over and over again, this happens. I mean, this happens in simple landing trace cases, like at the Westall High School.
Did this Central Park UFO crash net any extraterrestrial bodies or maybe even survivors?
We don't know. We really don't know. Because it never got in the news. We don't know anything about it. This is a very early incident, and I think people were much more trusting of, authority in those days. And so questioning wasn't really, protests and that sort of thing weren't quite in vogue like they are now.
Yeah, the cancel culture. Now, let's jump 40 years, 1992. Tell us what you recall about the South Haven retrieval.
Yeah, the South Haven, November 24th, 1992. This was originally investigated by John Ford of the Long Island UFO Network. He's a somewhat controversial character, and I wonder if a lot of his troubles kind of resulted from this, because he had some legal troubles. And you know how people who get too close, they get attacked.
And even their friends get attacked. Their friends and family also get attacked too, apparently.
Yeah, but apparently what happened was this gentleman, Walter Knowles, called the Long Island UFO Network hotline to report his sighting of what looked like a UFO crashing into the woods on the western edge of the park near this area. And he said he'd been driving east around 7 p.m., saw this cylindrical-shaped object with blue and white lights. Suddenly it makes a 90-degree turn and tumbles end over end into the woods, crashes, emits a huge flash of light, bright as daylight. He said several other people on the road stopped and saw this whole thing. The glow slowly faded to kind of an amber glow, and it appeared to be on fire. So he gets out of his car and starts going down the road, and at this moment sees 4 unmarked black helicopters heading straight towards the site. So I'm wondering if this is something that was possibly shot down. Hard to say, but this is certainly some of the speculation there. So he eventually left the scene and thinking he's going to see this on the news. Of course, he didn't. But there were other witnesses, and that's what makes this case really interesting. Most depend on 1 or 2 witnesses. This one has quite a few.
He, like you said, he was hoping to go see it on the news. I'm wondering how complicit these networks are. Obviously, I'm sure if they get a phone call from the agency or something else. When I say the agency, anyone who works for CIA knows that's slang for CIA. Or whatever, alphabet soup agency phones them up and says, don't air this. I'm very curious as to what they know. Because I would think when something like this happens, the first thing, they're paying attention to police scanners. The first thing they would do is the reporters on the beat will go there and start filming and try to catch a story. How many of them saw something and then are basically told to shut up or else?
Yeah, there's a very famous case which actually took place in New York where a UFO went right by a newsroom with all the news guys looking at this thing. And they quickly started writing up a story, and word came down pretty quick from their superiors that the story would not be allowed to run. And in fact, some of these guys were threatened later by, I guess you would call them men in black, the government men in black.
Literally.
So yeah, the media is very tightly controlled on this subject. Not so much the lower levels, because you do see local news often covering, UFO sightings. But when it comes to a major network, not so often. 1 or 2 big ones come out each year, I think. It does happen. It's usually when there's so many witnesses it can't be covered up. But yeah, just look at Terry Hansen's book, The Missing Times. He laid it out. Yeah, there is an absolute media cover-up on this subject.
Now, I hope I pronounced this properly. Is it the Maurice Bay? Is that how you say it?
Yeah, but we didn't really finish the South Haven Retrieval.
Okay. Yeah, keep going, of course.
Because there was Bob Harrison, a Brookhaven Hamlet resident. He saw this oval-shaped green object pass right over the Brookhaven town dump, and it appeared to be on a descending course. Another witness was a reverend. I love it when you have someone who has high moral ethics as a witness.
Yeah, because to me, I'm thinking of the Cape Girardeau incident where a pastor came to administer last rites. So yeah, you're absolutely right. When someone has those high ethics, I wonder what they do when they're told not to talk about it.
Yeah, he had a very weird experience on that night. He suddenly heard his car engine start by itself. At the same instant, his wall clock suddenly stopped, and his phone started ringing, but nobody was there. It was a whole wave of weird electromagnetic anomalies. And he looked outside, and his car burst into flame. And this is all on that night. Now, J.B. Michaels, he's an author who wrote a book about the whole Brookhaven crash. It's not the greatest book, but he does have some interesting eyewitness testimony. Like 3 teenagers who were driving through the area and saw this large glowing object, 80 feet in diameter, surrounded by 3 smaller triangular objects. Their car headlights started flickering. Suddenly the entire area was hit by a massive power failure. They saw a massive beam of light rise up from the ground and strike this object, which exploded and plummeted into South Haven Park.
That sounds to me what you were just talking about. Shoot them down. And we both know that back in the 50s, that was a standing order.
Exactly. And, of course, this is 1992, much later, but I think we had developed particle beam weapons and we're trying to shoot these things down. That's, supposedly the rumors of this case. So I don't know. We never really got the truth about what fully happened with it, because John Ford, he was arrested actually, and it put this whole case into sort of not debunking, but I guess disrepute, perhaps, would be the best way to put it. So I don't know. I don't know exactly what happened, but J.B. Michaels says he personally interviewed over 100 people who had either seen or had some sort of evidence concerning this incident.
That's a massive number of witnesses.
Right. And apparently there was some sort of plasma beam that was used to shoot these things down. Don't know if it's true. It's very hard to investigate UFO crashes. I mean, look what just happened in Brazil, where allegedly a UFO crashed. And it was all over the news. It was all over Reddit and various websites, which were, being pulled off the net as fast as they went on. And now no one's talking. Suddenly, no one's talking about it.
How long ago was this Brazil crash? Because this is news to me.
No, it's just like 2 months ago, 2 months. Not long. Maybe 3. I don't know. Time is so crazy right now. But yeah, UFO crashes are so difficult to investigate and dangerous.
I would imagine so, especially since you don't have much participation. And like you mentioned, Brazil, this is the era, 2020, where everybody has, almost everybody, I think it's 98% of the world's population has access to a smartphone. Almost everybody has a recorder in their pocket. When I say a recorder, I mean a video recorder. And not to mention surveillance cameras. They're so cheap. Other countries, I don't know about Brazil, but I know, for instance, Eastern Europe and the Middle East, everybody has dash cameras. And I'm assuming that's for, car crashes. The point is I would think there was some footage of this somewhere, and boom, somebody took it.
Yeah, that's how it usually goes. But the Maurice Bay crash retrieval is probably one of my favorite of the New York area, just because there's lots of witnesses who are named. They're from varying areas around this area. And it's an excellent case, and I think there's probably some legitimacy to it.
Now, that was 1989, right?
Yep, September 4th, 1989. There had been a wave of sightings, very active area, So, yeah, a lot of witnesses. I think this occurred, I believe it was during the day.
5:30 p.m. is what I'm reading. Is that right? Does that sound right or no?
Yeah, that may be right. Hey, if you're reading it.
Well, yeah. I don't know if that's anyway, go on.
But yeah, I know that there were a lot of witnesses. One include John Fitzgerald and his 3 sons, who saw this large, dark-colored boomerang-shaped object passed right overhead. And they were, apparently, our government had been tracking this thing by satellite. There was one guy who contacted UFO witnesses when he heard, UFO investigators, again, from the Long Island UFO Network, when they heard about when this case started getting publicized. And he said that he was actually part of a team who developed a plasma-like weapon, a Star Wars type weapon.
SDI, that's what I'm thinking, yeah. Star Wars Defense Initiative.
And he was told to set this thing up and was not allowed to remain, but he had no sooner set it up when he was kicked off. But he learned later that this was a successful attempt to shoot down a UFO, which they actually did, and that alien bodies were recovered and sent to the wreckage, and alien bodies were recovered and sent to Brookhaven labs for study, which would make sense. I mean, because that would be the place to send them.
There is a question here, and if there's anything else you want to mention, Preston, I was going to take questions from now until the next 15 minutes or so.
I would just add that, there were a number of other witnesses who saw stuff on that night. Mary McLaughlin and her 2 sons, another resident, Mona Rowe, she saw things. Another person who did not want their name used, she and her son saw stuff. Another father and his son, another lady, another guy, a lot of witnesses. Paul Peterson, he was in his home in central Maurice when he saw very bright lights passing overhead, followed by military helicopters. So, yeah, it's a great case. I think something definitely happened there.
Well, I do hope, I don't want any harm to come even to ETs, but I do hope if we don't have a landing right here in the valley, then maybe we are become privy to coming up to a site before we're told to get out, assuming that we are not going to be shown these off-world vehicles, which I'm really hoping that we see. Okay, here's a question for you. This is from Lasha Senyak. Has a UFO ever crashed in a city or a populated area? Seems odds they always crash in the woods.
No, we have got the Central Park crash.
That was going to be my answer, yes. 100 plus witnesses.
Right. So there are a number of them which have crashed in areas where it should have been front page news. But sometimes these, like there was one in Mattydale, in Syracuse, New York, which was, not a remote area by any means, but it was at 3 a.m. And there's only 2 witnesses that we know of who saw this typical flying saucer covered with multicolored lights, bright enough to illuminate the surrounding area. This couple drove by and saw uniformed men, some people in civilian clothes, surrounding this object, taking photographs. The wife turned to her husband and thought, well, maybe this is that Canadian Avro disc that had been in the news.
The Avro car, yes.
But they actually called the police, and the officer who answered the call said, yes, we know about it, but it is a military secret and we cannot discuss it. He called the newspapers, and the reporters later contacted him and said that the police denied any knowledge whatsoever. So these things are covered up very quickly, but yeah, usually they don't take place in a crowded area. And if one were to land, on Broadway in New York or, in central Phoenix, or I think it would be impossible to cover up. They would I don't know what their tactic would be, but I'd like to see them try to cover something like that up.
Oh, especially now, can you imagine if something like that happened in Vegas? We do know. We talked about that last time, as a matter of fact. But let's say 2020 or 2020 minus, shelter at home. Maybe, say 2019, Las Vegas. And I couldn't imagine trying to cover something like that up when you have, festivals. Now, it probably wouldn't be the best if people were there for the Electric Daisy Carnival and were tripping and saw the lights, and maybe they can be told, oh, it was part of the light show. But when you have tens of thousands of people, how do you get them all to play ball? I couldn't see the Men in Black or whatever agency goes around scaring people shutting up that many people.
Yeah, my guess is they'll do a attack like, oh, it's a government military experimental craft. But if there's little ETs, that argument is not going to work. So I don't know. I'm very interested. The Pentagon is saying further disclosures are coming, but they didn't say what.
Yeah, very vague. I know that always annoys me. And again, we've known about these metamaterials, again, like I said earlier, that Art Bell has had for a long time. Raymond Fowler, if I'm not mistaken, has over 20 different pieces of debris. And, why hasn't that been studied? Or has it that we're just not known about? There's just all this that it's sad that it has to come now. And the timing, Preston, the timing in the midst of this global pandemic, stay at home, or we are quarantining healthy people, which doesn't sound right in general. And by the way, we're going to release some off-world vehicles for you that not made it to this earth, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's almost a joke. It's mind-blowing, really. I can't imagine what is going on behind the scenes, but it must be complete chaos to have this being put forth now, unless it's all very carefully planned. And they're like, okay, let's get this pandemic going, and right when it's at its peak, let's release this info. And I don't know. It's very curious.
Now, this is again speculation, and we could both speculate on this. Do you think if people were shown these vehicles that they would have that War of the Worlds type of fear that they did back in that Orson Welles broadcast? Or do you think we're ready? In my opinion, I think we're beyond ready because our material sciences can do some pretty amazing stuff.
Well, people will sort of eat what you feed them. So if you present this in a way that's very fearful, yeah, it's going to cause panic. We saw that with the War of the Worlds broadcast, which was designed to be fearful. It was pretty much a horror story. But if you roll this out in a very gentle way and say, listen, yes, this is an ET vehicle. You don't have to worry. We don't think they're going to take over the planet. I think people will buy that. I don't see that happening. I think they're going to be very tight-lipped about, we know nothing sort of thing here. All we know is we have this, and it's all, we can't tell you more. Yeah, there's going to be some people who are not going to accept this.
You're right. You're right. Even if they're shown the bodies, they'll say, that's, Dr. Mengeles' project or something like that. You're absolutely right. I don't think anything will convince certain people.
No, and it's going to cause havoc. It's going to cause havoc in housing and real estate. It's going to cause havoc with religion. It's going to cause havoc with business and the stock market. It's going to cause havoc on all levels of society, as big events normally do. Look what's happened with this pandemic. It's havoc everywhere on all levels of society. So I imagine there's going to be some real upset, but ultimately people are very strong. We're very resilient. We're extremely adaptable. It's going to take maybe a couple of months and we'll be like, fine, let's move on. What's next?
When I first heard that story, as you know, I interview a ton of different people on this. It's not just people with regards to UFOs and ghosts. I have a lot of federal cops here. I've had CIA, FBI, DIA, DEA, Customs, Secret Service, and I've reached out to pretty much all of them. And most didn't know or couldn't say is usually the answer, right? But I did hear from a friend in the DIA who he doesn't want his name known. If you ever hear the interview I've done with him, he has a code name that he used just for that interview. I heard that Bob Lazar is possibly going to be called to testify in a closed-door hearing. Now, if that happens, I think we're really going to have some, headway that we have been waiting for, far beyond showing us this craft.
Yeah, I hope so. I've always believed Bob Lazar is telling the truth, if only because he was so viciously attacked. Whenever I see someone being, that viciously debunked, it raises a red flag. And looking into the case, it's not just him. There's, dozens of whistleblowers coming out of Area 51. Many, who pretty much verify exactly what he said. And I have to tell you, I've talked to experiencers firsthand who were shocked to see some of his information because it matched what they saw. Some of these craft that he described is exactly what they were taking on board.
Do you recall what I told you a few months ago when we were hanging out and we were talking about Billy Meier and I was about to say something. You're like, "Is it good or bad?" I said, "It's good. Don't worry." And this is part that really was mind blowing to me. When Bob Lazar was asked at the UFO Congress 2015 if he had ever seen any footage of UFOs that look identical or very similar to the sports model he worked on, his answer was like, "Well, I gotta tell you, that Billy Meier guy," he says, "one of those craft, either he knew exactly what was going on at S4 and hoaxed it, or he's telling the truth." And then under his breath, he goes, "I think he's telling the truth." And I watched that footage again yesterday. Sure, it's old, but wow, it's mind-blowing when you actually look at it from the lens. Instead of saying, is it true or isn't it true, when you just drop that and look at it, knowing that Bob Lazar was telling the truth, and knowing that Bob Lazar said, this looks like it, reacts the same way, flies the same way. And I think it opens up a whole new paradigm. It did for me, at least. What do you say about that?
Yeah, gosh, it's so hard to determine the truth these days. There's so much disinformation and all these great videos coming out, and we have no information about them. It's very hard to comment on. I think the Billy Meier case is extremely controversial, but to me, looking at it objectively, and I have to tell you, I've got all the books on it, and I think it's probably legitimate. I don't think he faked this stuff, simply because there have been crowds of 50 or more people who were with him when these objects were overhead, darting around. And other cases where it's just 10 or 5. But still, when you have multiple witnesses who are willing to go forward and say, "I was there, I saw it, he's not lying," I don't think it's fair to call the case a complete hoax.
Especially in that era, when someone would say something like that, you could lose your job. I mean, you're going to be ridiculed for the rest of your life. I don't see how anyone would gain by admitting that unless it was true.
Yeah, and for that matter, many governments across the world showed a big interest in the Billy Meier case. There was multiple assassination attempts on him. Wendell Stevens was there during one. Wendell Stevens went really deep into that case and had a lot of information where he was able to verify that, yes, it was probably true.
Now, here's another question for you, and I know we're nearing the end, so I'll try to wrap things up. This is also from Lasha. Have abductions increased or decreased? And has Preston ever researched human mutilations?
Abductions are still going on. Absolutely. I know a guy in England who is having them currently. They have not stopped. I can't really speak to whether they've increased or decreased. It's very hard to say, how many people are being abducted, but I think it's a lot, and I don't think it's stopped. And I'm sorry, what was the other part of the question?
Have you yourself ever researched human mutilations?
Not firsthand. I've certainly looked into it, and yes, it does happen. For sure, no doubt.
I've seen some of those photos, and they are freakishly scary because of how the incisions are made. It's a whole new level. Let me ask you this real quick. I've heard possibly that cattle mutilations, I actually heard this from Linda Moulton Howe's stream when she interviewed, I think it was Eddie Abbott, that the reason cattle mutilations are happening are because they're using the cattle to harvest either humans or hybrids. What's your take on that? That's the first time I've ever heard something like that.
Again, you're asking me to speculate?
Yeah.
But I will tell you, I wrote UFOs over Colorado and UFOs over New Mexico. Those are the two hardest hit states. And I did cover the whole mutilation phenomena. It was very perplexing because there are some cases where there's black helicopters there watching this take place. I think our government is aware of it. They may be involved in it to a certain degree. I don't think they're responsible because many people have tracked this to UFOs and extraterrestrials. I think it is all about DNA. There's been some speculation that, maybe they're testing, where there's a lot of mutilations is where there's been a lot of nuclear testing. But Nevada doesn't have as many mutilations as New Mexico and Colorado, and that's where most of the nuclear testing was. I think it's harvesting DNA to make their hybrid babies, because there's lots of DNA that's very similar.
Yes.
99% of all DNA on all living creatures is pretty much exactly the same. Our it may look like there's a large variation of life forms, but in truth, the DNA between all life forms, whether it's a carrot or a giraffe, is 95% the same. So they can use this DNA for whatever they want.
Genetics. It's same way we started breeding wolves into dogs, and you're absolutely right. It's not as hard as it's now. To create it from the ground up is one thing, but to crossbreed and have your pure breeds and different experiments, which again, speculation, I think we may be part of or have been for millennia, if not even longer than that. But it's, again, what you just said is a very true statement, and it's mind-blowing. You look at jellyfish. There is nothing about them that looks like us, and yet we share such a high percentage of the DNA with them.
It's crazy. And our geneticists, this is a great field of research right now. It's exploding. They've made glowing cats, cats that glow, and all kinds of weird stuff. They're growing ears on mice.
Mice, thank you for saying that. I was just about to say that. I know, right? They're having a field day now, and Dolly the sheep was cloned, 20 years ago now?
Yeah, and this is just what we've heard. So that the military does not release most of that for years and years. And so it must be a freak show in these genetic labs where I'm sure they've created all kinds of things with human beings that must be very disturbing.
Wouldn't you just love to be a fly on the wall in some of those rooms, or the rooms where they're talking or showing the final product?
Yeah, like Area 51. I have to tell you, man, I had some out-of-body stuff with that freaked me out.
Really? Ooh, can you tell us about that real quick?
Yeah, Fate magazine, which is a leading paranormal magazine, did an experiment where they asked people to go to Area 51, remote view it, go there out of body, just do a psychic reading, and they got a big response. All women, by the way, who went there and saw these sort of genetic experiments going on. And I learned to do astral travel following the death of my mother, and got pretty good at it, and still do it, and made it my mission once to go to Area 51. And I did it. I couldn't believe it. Got there, and I'm landing down on Groom Lake, and I'm like, wow, this is amazing. I can't believe this. I actually did it. And thought to myself, well, I bet there's ETs in these hangars. Now, according to the people who've done this, the ETs were aware of them and looked at them and were not happy about it. So I got scared and instantly was pulled back into my body, but later tried again and didn't remember it as a fully conscious experience, but more dreamlike. I have to just put that out there, but I feel like it's real because I was taken into Area 51 with a small group of people, and it was enormous. It was like a city, all underground, and we were shown this poor human who was genetically mutated. And my heart broke. And I had the instant impression that this person had lived their entire life, was born there, created there, and worked there as basically a slave. And was humanoid, but certainly could not pass for human on Earth. They were distorted.
Well, what did it look like? Same skin color, or the eyes bigger, bald, or what?
It was very misshapen, a very misshapen human being. Very short, very, it's crab-like almost. It's hard to describe. Just a large head, bald, hunched over, skinny, not healthy looking, and just dreadful. It was ghastly.
Oh, my heart breaks for that being. And to your point what you said a moment ago about either lucid dreaming or remote viewing, which, correct me if I'm wrong, they're very closely related, right?
Yeah, I would say that that's a fair statement.
I've heard from other people, multiple people, that when they remote view a certain area and there are non-terrestrials there, they know. They'll either get in your head or look at you and say, or look at you in a stern way, like, hey, you're watching us and we know it, sort of deal. Anyhow, let me say a couple things to everyone since we did get past our time, and I will give you a chance, Preston, to say anything else that you want to say. For everybody out there, I have an exercise for you. This is going to be mind-blowing for you. Not that mind-blowing, but you're going to enjoy this. I want you all to open up a browser. First, take a piece of paper and write down the word Illuminati. Make sure you spell it properly. Then, in your browser, type in Illuminati, but backwards, okay? You got that? Backwards. I-T-A, I can't even read my own writing. The point is it's Illuminati backwards. Then hit .com and see where it takes you. And I would love to hear what you guys think after that. Now, I have an idea why it takes you there, but we'll save that for another day. I also want to say thanks, Pam Rettenberg, for the footage, for making it. If anybody out there wants to help us, we're always looking for more help. This is not very easy to do. So I also see a comment in here. I don't see where it's from the person who basically mentioned to make a video about tall whites. We will do our best, and actually we will dedicate a show to them once I get Charles Hall. Now, I don't like to talk about future guests in case something happens, so I'll just let you know that tomorrow's guest has something to do with today's topic, more crashes and retrievals. Let me just give you a clue that this person, I've interviewed him before, and let's just say he's been up close and personal to multiple crashes and retrievals. Now, with that being said, as I've said whatever I needed to get off my chest for you folks, let me turn it over to my dear friend Preston. Preston, if you have any final thoughts, now would be a good time to spill them out.
Yeah, if you want to check out my research, you can check out my website. Just Google my name, it'll take you there. My latest book is Onboard UFO Experiences. I have another book coming out shortly about UFOs that hover over drive-in theaters. It's crazy. I've got 100 cases. This is a really important time in UFO research and in the world in general. So I'm very interested to see how this Pentagon disclosure rolls out, and I'm hoping it's full on. Show us the craft, because there will be no change in society. People are not going to care about a piece of metal or some footage. They're just not. It's not going to have any effect. We need to see the bodies. So that's what I want to see. Not a picture.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I've seen enough pictures. Show me their darn body in person. Anyway, Preston, hang by for a quick moment, and let's hope the next time we do a show that we've seen them. We've actually gone and touched pieces of the craft and seeing a body, whether it be encased in glass or whatever. And also, earlier, if you guys paid attention to what I said, make sure you watch Third Phase of the Moon and pay attention. They've been doing some special reporting on some super special topics, and as a matter of fact, I'm going to be part of it tonight, so make sure you all check it out, and I'm sure most of you have been paying attention to that channel the last few days. As a matter of fact, I see Blake and Brent in the chat, so this is a shout out to the cousins and a shout out to all you dear friends. With that being said, Preston and I are officially hopping off.